Well, welcome once again to our Better Together conversation series that we've been having here at Christ Place Church. It's been an awesome opportunity for us to take some time and pause out of all the busyness of our week and just take some time to hear people's stories, expand our perspective, and practice the art of understanding and learning about people's lives. And so tonight I get a chance to sit in. My name is Clea. I'm the campus pastor at our Van Dorn location here in Lincoln, and I get the honor tonight to kind of take over the interview chair. And so I'm excited tonight because a good friend of mine is going to be joining us tonight. This is Meetatrice Ingram, and she is a Christ Place babe. She's been here forever. And when I was new to Christ Place Church, Meetatrice, you were here. You're the reason why I got involved, and you've always been an outgoing person who just want to draw people in. Mm-hmm. And so it's been fun to do life with you here at Christ Place and kind of see you become a mother, grow your family, become someone who is really active in the community. Mm-hmm. And you are a member of our Van Dorn location, yep. So we get a chance to see you every weekend over there at Van Dorn, so yep. That's really exciting for us. But thanks for making time to be here tonight.
For sure.
And share your story with us. And so I just want to get us going.
Okay.
And I know a little bit about you, but there's probably a lot of people who know you that are watching because you're amazing, right? Probably one of the most popular people in Lincoln.
No, that's false.
Whatever. But the question, tell us a little bit about yourself, whatever that means to you. Just tell us about Meetatrice.
Sure. Well, currently, I live in Lincoln. I'm married to a stud who actually did an interview a couple weeks ago,
yes,
Ruben.
He is.
We have 4 amazing, wild children. And for a number of years we homeschooled. We're actually transitioning out of that into running a homeschool program in Lincoln. Yeah. So moving out of the home and you're
kind of the spearhead of that little endeavor, aren't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's very exciting. So we have that on the horizon in the fall. So educator, I guess by title, went to Nebraska Wesleyan and got a couple of teaching degrees and really very passionate about education. That's kind of my jam. Yeah. So I don't know what else. I'm from Wisconsin originally. Mm-hmm. So
no judgment there. That wasn't judgment.
It felt like judgment a little bit. Or maybe it's just jealousy.
Maybe, I don't know.
I think it was probably more jealousy.
I'm from Colorado anyway, so
whatever. Yeah, we're not even rivals, really.
I know. Who cares?
So, who cares about this?
I digress.
But I've been in Nebraska for, since I was 16. And y'all don't need to know how old I am now, but it's been a long time. So I'm a Nebraskanite now, but I don't know, that's a little history.
Yeah. So education, you went to school for education. What was the journey to even wanting to be involved in education? How did you get in that direction?
I honestly don't know. I was signed up for nursing school, actually enrolled at Bryan Nursing School. And a week before I was supposed to start, I was like, I don't think I'm on the right path. I think it's supposed to be teaching. And I had been an assistant teacher at a Montessori school for several years while I was in college. And I don't know why it took so long for that to click, that this was really what I was passionate about and what I like to do. So, and specifically sort of that alternative education route. So I did teach in public schools. For a little bit, just wasn't a good fit for me. I'm more of an alternative educator. So we've kind of found our rhythm with homeschooling and now with starting this homeschool program. So
that's a new endeavor coming up. Probably taking a lot of time and energy, and you've been a huge voice in educating your kids through taking time to homeschool. What's it been like taking a hold of the education for your kids and being able to own that? And these are highly formative years for them. What's that been like for you?
A huge blessing. Yeah. I never pictured myself homeschooling. You know, I taught in public schools, and my kids are going to public school, and and I feel like God just really changed that direction for us. And but once I started researching just the benefit of that for myself, obviously I'm not a person who's like, everybody should do this, because I don't think there's anything everybody should, it's not for everybody. But it was for us, and it's really clear now to see the path that God set us on with just getting an opportunity to do that with my own kids, and then how that has expanded to including more students and even this summer, having an opportunity to teach an African American history class to a bunch of kids around the U.S., which was crazy. I thought maybe 10 people from Nebraska would sign up, and we had people in a ton of different states. And but it truly is a passion, and I think kids don't get enough credit all the time for what they're capable of, and it's really cool to see people grow. It's really cool to see kids grow, and their learning and how they take in the world. It's been a cool thing.
Yeah. So this class that you've had a chance to do during the summer had more people come in and be a part of it than you had originally anticipated. For you, what was the motivation in offering this course in the first place?
Yeah.
What was that tied to?
So, obviously, I hate using the word climate because I feel like it's super overused, but the climate, the climate, just was very tense, and I think especially already with the pandemic, we're already, people are in uncharted territory, and then racial tensions start growing again. And I personally, as an educator, one of the things that I do that I kind of geek out about is study a lot of curriculum. Like I love curriculum. I love researching. I love reading. However, it was very disheartening to me that there just was not a lot of accurate African American history curriculum out there. And, the very few ones that I found were maybe just not balanced the way that I wanted them to be. Some of them are a little really one-sided, like just white people are bad, and I'm like, well, I don't know if that's what I want to teach, But a lot of them are what we kind of use the word whitewashed. So a lot of histories are just unfortunately very whitewashed, and African Americans are either just not present, or there's a few very token African Americans, your Harriet Tubmans and your Martin Luther Kings, and it just doesn't tell the whole story.
Right.
And, kind of where I felt my place in this whole conversation about race, being an educator, being someone who just believes in kids' ability to learn, to love people, I was like, and for my own kids, I'm like, I really want them to hear an accurate history of African Americans, not only the hardships, but the amazing things that are worth celebrating that we don't often, I wasn't taught in schools, and so, my motivation behind that was I'm looking through curriculum and I'm like, I really think I need to do this. I think I need to, do my own research, pool my own resources, and give kids an opportunity to see a different side of this.
Right.
And it turned out to be so great. Like we started in Africa, and I think a lot of African American histories, unfortunately, just start with slavery. Like off the bat, it's just like slaves. And I'm like, well, it came from somewhere, But it was just so great to be able to present this whole picture to students. And, and then we ended talking about racism in America. What does Black Lives Matter mean? And these were questions that I was getting from my families, who were mostly white families. But the opportunity to have conversations, I think, unfortunately, sometimes African Americans unwillingly put walls up, and it's hard for people to really come to them and say, like, what about that? Especially, white people sometimes want to know these things, but they're afraid to ask, and they're afraid it's inappropriate.
You're going to come off offensive.
They're going to come off offensive. They're not, they're going to offend somebody. So they just don't. So I feel like this class really opened the door for people to be able to ask questions that they wanted to ask. And they were like, okay, she's offering this class. And I got so many emails and felt, like, what about this? What about that? This is interesting. And it felt amazing to be able to open up dialogue, I think, for people who have traditionally felt like this is something that we just don't talk about. But also getting to work with students but there are some world changers out there. I'm telling you, these kids were like fired up. Like we would cover a topic and they were like, that's not right. That's, they would they're typing in the chat box. And, exactly. And they're like, that's wrong. And I would say things like, what if you lived in this time? Like, what would your response have been? And, and to hear these kids, like 8, 9, 10-year-olds, like, I would have defended my African-American friends, or I would have been on the Underground Railroad. And so passionate. And so honestly, it brought me a lot of hope. It was
Yeah.
a huge highlight of my summer in the midst of some really trying times, really
dark
tense
things. Yeah.
times. I had these Wednesday classes to look forward to, and these students and parents who were committed to
Right.
learning a history that they had never heard before. And I cannot tell you the number of people who messaged me and were like, how did I never learn this? Where was this? And I'm like, I was right there with you. You know, I went to public school. I was taught what everybody else was taught. It wasn't until I was older that I was like, wait a minute, there's more.
Something's missing here.
Something's missing from this. So
Yeah.
So it was a good experience.
So investing your time in this and seeing an opportunity to basically fight the impact of the single story. You know, we're only exposed in a lot of ways to a portion of what it means to be an African American in that experience. And so you saw it upon yourself. This is an opportunity to, one, for my kids, make sure they get a more complete picture of that. So what was it like as you're teaching this class with your kids are involved in it and your kids are interacting with other kids, kids that don't look like them, white kids, probably other races. What was it like as a mom, as an educator, to see your kids interacting and have this opportunity that you didn't have at that age?
It was, honestly, it was a little, I was emotional about it. And I love what you said, that, you know, focusing on more than just that single story, because I think this whole race conversation, that has so much to do with it. And our students, like, one of the things that I would ask them, especially like the week we covered civil rights, I started off by saying, do you have any friends or family members that don't have the same skin color as you? And almost all of my students said yes. And I said, okay, now I want you to picture that person, and picture not being able to go get ice cream with that friend, not being able to go to the swimming pool, not being able to go to the restaurant. And all of them were just like, you know, and you could see, like, they're looking at their family members and, you know. And I think part of what we talked about was relationships. So when you have a relationship with somebody, you care about that person, and it doesn't matter what they look like. It doesn't, but this conversation about race gets so much more personal, so much more meaningful when you can picture somebody that all of a sudden you would not be able to have a relationship. So in that time, it was like, okay, your best friend who's not the same color as you, bam, you're not going swimming together anymore, because that's what it was like during segregation, or you would not be in school together. You would not get to play in the playground together. And they all were like, so when I see my kids now, my African-American kids interacting with other kids that don't look like them, it's such an emotional experience, because I really do emotionally connect to history. It's one of the reasons I'm passionate about history, but it is not lost on me how far we have come. And it's not lost on me when I see my kids interacting, taking classes, playing on the playground with kids that don't look like them. It's not lost on me how not too long ago, none of that would be possible. And I even share a story in class where one of my best friends in elementary school, we were, I mean, just the closest of friends. I was never allowed to go to her birthday parties because her grandparents raised her and they did not like black people. And I remember her just telling me, you know, like, she's super disappointed and she's handing out invitations and she's like, I can't invite you. And I'm like, why not? We're best, you know, like, we're literally best friends. And she's like, my grandparents, you know, and that was just the way it was every year. And so, you know, it was something that I just learned to deal with as a child. I was never invited over to her house. She was not allowed to come to my house. We just, you know, we were friends at school and that was it. And so looking at my kids and the relationships, and obviously that wasn't the situation with every one of my friends, but I remember that, and I remember being like, you know, on one hand I was like, well, that sucks, and on the other hand I was like, I guess that's just the way it is. So to be able to see my kids in a different place, you know, it's so important to me that they know the history, that they know who has made sacrifices along the way, who has fought for them to be able to have this experience. So I don't take that lightly at all.
And then to be able to process that history and engage in that history with their white friends. Something where, usually in context as an African American, sometimes, you know, we want others to be interested in our history too, because there's but they're able to now, they have people who want to engage in it together, and it's not just, yeah, I'm the African American kid learning about African American history, but I'm
Right.
engaging it with white friends, and we're learning about this together, and
Right.
seeing your kids be able to create a connection and have friendships that maybe they have friends that maybe understand their background a little more, even though it's
Yes.
children.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think the more we can have conversations about race instead of having it be on the list of taboo topics, I think we make a lot of progress that way. I had a friend from high school actually message me a while ago. She was my best friend in high school, and she's white. And she basically was like, how did I not know about this? How were we friends for so long? And I'm only just now realizing that, you know, racism in America is still a thing. And I think a lot of that was because we just didn't talk about it, you know? It was one of those things where it was like, I was black and I talked about black issues with my black family and my black friends, and you just didn't cross that line with other people. I think maybe for fear that they wouldn't understand or, you know, and certainly she's not going to bring it up to me for some of those same reasons, you know, like it's awkward and it's uncomfortable. And in her case, she was like, I feel like, you know, in school we're taught, you know, slavery was bad, we fixed it. And then civil rights was bad, we fixed it. And then everyone went on with their lives. She's like, I had no idea that these things still took place. So I think the more we can have conversations about our differences, the better that is. So to see my black kids with white kids, with Asian Americans, with Hispanic Americans, you know, sitting and having these conversations, it's so freeing for them. You know, actually, I think about a situation where my son, Lincoln, he's 9, was at summer camp recently, and they were all getting out their sunscreen and putting it on, and Lincoln's like, I don't have to wear sunscreen, and all the kids are like, what? And he's like, yeah, I don't ever burn, and one of the kids was like, oh, that's not fair, and like, but just like him being confident to say, you know, in amidst a bunch of white boys, and him being like, I don't need to do that, and that being okay to talk about. I just remember being a kid and being so shy about anything that had to do with my race, anything that singled me out. I certainly would not have announced to my friends that I don't have to wear. I would have just put the sunscreen on because I wanted to feel like I was like everybody else. So for him to be able to own it and just be like, hey, this is a way that we're different. And I can say that, and that's okay. That was just huge, you know, and he told me that story later. He's like, all my friends were jealous because they didn't, you know, and I was, but to see him like happy about his skin color and comfortable with talking with his friends, I feel like that's part of what that class allowed us to do, was to be able to have those conversations without having that sort of embarrassment attached to it or, you know, awkwardness because I'm different. So.
These are conversations. It's hard as adults because on one end, as an African American, you are being misunderstood is something that you're afraid of because it's going to be taken the wrong way, and you're misunderstood so much you just kind of get tired of it after a while. And on the other end of the spectrum, you know, our white friends who legitimately want to know about our experience, just that fear of what if I come off as racist? What if I say something to offend you? And dealing with that emotion, and so the conversation doesn't happen.
So for those reasons, it's like nobody says anything.
So
you know.
But now you've created an opportunity for children to break that barrier. And now you've got Lincoln stepping out in confidence, able to bring his full self to his friendships and not have to, you know, leave his blackness at the door because that makes the room uncomfortable.
Just put sunscreen on because everybody else is doing it. And what I'll say to that too is I think it's really important for African Americans to create more opportunities like that. You know, I will be honest, one of my fears with teaching this class to a majority of white students was that they would have an interaction with an African American later and be shot down, you know, like feel like, oh, I took this class, so now I'm going to ask this question of this African American and have someone get offended or be like, you should not be asking me that question. Or, you know, and that was one of my fears was, man, I really hope that people continue to leave doors open for these students who really, and their parents, you know, who really felt comfortable coming to me with their questions. But I think because African Americans have so long been misunderstood, have so long felt like we have had to either put a filter on what we say, or know that if we say it, we're going to get challenged. I think that when people do start to have those conversations, there's sometimes this tension, like they get offended really easily. So, my fear was, man, I don't want to send these students out, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, like, I took a class from a black teacher and now I can talk to black people, and then have someone be like, stop talking about black stuff, so I'm like, oh, just be kind to them, world. Like, just, if you're an African-American and someone's like legitimately coming to you. Now, I will say, not every African-American feels like they want to teach.
Exactly.
And that's okay too. So, you can respectfully just be like, you know what, I don't want to talk about this. Like, thanks for coming to me, asking me this. But my hope would be that those conversations are happening in places where there have been real relationships cultivated. So we are friends, and I can ask, I've had really close friends ask me, like, how often do you wash your hair? Oh, really? How can we, and I'm like, that's cool, because we're friends and we can talk about that, So trying to keep those doors open without being quick to be offended, I think is really important. In the midst of that conversation too.
That's the challenge of the African American, is depending on who you are, you may just be tired of trying to explain that.
Yes.
And maybe the conversation itself seems like not a huge deal, but time and time after again, if someone asking you about why is your hair weird,
right,
you get tired of it, and it creates almost a traumatic experience. So there's, in some situations, we as African Americans, we don't want to have to talk about it because we've been burned by it too many times.
Right.
So for you, in your experience, why do you feel like you're able to be someone who can be that space?
Yeah, and I will say, I'm not always. I have to, and I actually had a friend ask me a really good question. And it was basically like, how do you know you've hit your limit? Like, what do you watch for?
Yeah.
And I will say, if I'm being 100% honest, it's when I tend to want to answer a little bit sarcastically.
Sarcastic? What?
I know. This is hard for you to understand. Because, honestly, I really want to be a bridge builder. That is really my goal. I am an African American who basically grew up in white communities my entire life. I'm very used to being the only black girl in the room. In most of my classes growing up, I feel like, and now as a homeschooler in Lincoln, Nebraska, we are the only black people in the room 99.9% of the time,
right.
And that just is my reality. And so as a Christian, I feel like part of what I want to do, what I'm passionate about, is kind of bridging these worlds. And, it's hard because sometimes I just want to be a Christian. I don't want to be singled out as a black Christian. I just want, but I also understand that that's just unique to who I am as a person. It's not something that I'm going to try to hide.
Yeah.
Even if that makes somebody else uncomfortable, that's not something I'm going to try to hide. But there are things that white Christians can learn from black Christians if they're willing to learn. And I'm willing to teach. That's just part of, I think, just kind of my makeup as an educator, but also honestly as a relator. I just like people. I really like people. I like hearing their stories. I like connecting people. I truly believe that we all have things that we can learn from each other if we're willing to have conversations and just sit down and get to know somebody. And I really love people. So I think that's what it makes it easier for me to kind of put those things out there. And, not even with my African American history class, but just, other thoughts that I'm having or anything. It's easier for me to put those things out there and start the conversation because I really do genuinely think that if people can build relationships and connections, all of this gets easier. And honestly, it's very, for lack of a better term, it is black and white. It's left or right. You're either for people, you're either for all of God's people, or you're not. And all of these other side conversations that people get caught up in, that's not the main issue. It's either, and I'm really talking to Christians now, you either accept God's redemption in your life and freely offer that to others, or you don't.
Yeah.
There's really no in between. And this whole issue with race and with Black Lives Matter, which, man, can we address that in a minute, but just You're either for people who have been marginalized and systematically targeted for a number of years, or you're not.
Right.
there's no in between.
Right.
And so I think when if we can get to that heart of that conversation, that we're talking about people, and we're not just talking about people, we're talking about God's people, and we're not just talking about God's people, we're talking about people created in God's image.
Yeah.
And so this really shouldn't be that hard of a conversation. We either love people and we want the best for them, and we trust the best for them, and we seek the best for them, and we use our voices to advocate for them, or we don't, you know, or we can get caught up in all of these other all lives matter, you know, or how dare you not kneel for the flag. I mean, we can get caught up in all of these things that bring up tension and anger, or we can remember that at the very foundation, we're talking about people. As a parent, as a mother of 2 Black boys, that's where I'm going to land every time. We're talking about people, and, you know, man, the conversations I've had with people, just sometimes they're so devoid of compassion for people, you know, and I think that's why I'm a bridge builder. I'm a relational person, and that's why this thing is so hard for me sometimes, when we choose to not have compassion for people. I struggle with that a little bit.
Yeah. So you've addressed a little bit of you know, what you want to say to Christians. What do you want your church to know? You've attended Christ Place for a long time.
Yeah.
This is not the first time you've had an opportunity to share what's on your heart. You write. You make your thoughts known. What do you want our church to know?
That's tough, and it's loaded. I think, you know, 4 years ago we were here because of incidents in Ferguson, and I had an opportunity to sit down with Pastor Rick, and and part of what launched me into this whole racial discussion, because I will say before then I didn't talk about race on social media. It was one of those things where, you know, like what we talked about, it feels people don't respond well. You kind of get labeled as the angry Black woman, or, you know, or often what happened was I would maybe say something about race and it would be reasoned away. I don't think that was because, you know, you're Black. I think, you know, and I'm like, so I just was like, I'm done talking about race. Forget it. But what kind of launched me back into that conversation was the timing of this thing with Ferguson. And so I had recently posted a picture of our family on social media, and all of these friends from Christ Place, white friends, are commenting, oh, you have such beautiful families, you know, so amazing, da da da. And then literally I'm seeing these same people just making the most not compassionate comments about what's going on in Ferguson, you know, and I was like, I don't know if they understand I belong to this group of people they're talking about, you know. So you can't, you know, make comments about how amazing my family is and da da da, and then at the same time make these negative general statements about African Americans and, you know, the pain that they're feeling and the reason that they're acting out on this pain. And so that was kind of what launched me forward 4 years ago. And so, you know, I would say to our church, we have felt so loved. We have felt so supported in this community. We feel like we are a part of it. We have amazing friends of different races who have shown up for us, who have brought us meals when we've needed them, and taken our kids out, and I mean, just like wholly supported our family. And so I would ask that continue through this time of racial tension. If you love a family of color well, that should be evident through this time as well. I would say try really hard, and I'm not going to say you shouldn't use your voice or share your thoughts and opinions, but try really hard to remember that this is about people. This is about families. This is about families like ours. You know, my husband's been pulled over in Lincoln, Nebraska unnecessarily unnecessarily. We have had confrontations with any confrontation I have with anyone in law enforcement automatically makes me a little bit nervous. Try to remember our family. Try to remember other families of color that you have loved well, that you have sacrificed for, prayed for, worshiped with, served with. And I feel like if we can remember some of that as we have these racial conversations, the whole tone is changed, because now you remember we're talking about people, and it's okay if we don't agree on some of the politics. It's okay if we don't agree on how things can get done, but if we're not starting with compassion, I struggle with that. I struggle with the lack of compassion. I struggle with being so quick to jump to judgment and criticism more than starting with compassion. So I guess that's what I would want to say, is just remember compassion, remember the families of color that you have loved well, supported, and let that be a foundation for future whatever.
And maybe something I hear you saying is for the white person who has that African American in their family, remember that them being African American affects their daily lives.
Yeah.
And don't dismiss that or ignore it.
Right.
Consider that as you're loving them.
Right.
And I think the key thing for you has been, there have been relationships where the conversation became a platform for you to have that connection. And that relationship created that safe space.
Yeah.
And so for you, those white friends of yours who were able to then consider you in times where you being an African American and what's happening is being impacted by that.
Right.
It's like, shoot, I need to check in with Latrice, or I need to see what's going on with them. And it's different than just kind of pretending like you as an African American doesn't exist and it doesn't impact the way that you live.
Right. And not only that, but just using that knowledge of that relationship in other conversations. So whether you're talking about our family or not, if you're watching a video of a man being strangled, being in a chokehold, or with a cop with a knee on this man's neck, and your first response is not compassion, regardless of what you believe politically, regardless of whether or not this man first of all, didn't deserve that, because we don't just, it's not vigilante justice. We don't just run around on the streets killing people. But if your first response is not compassion in that instance, but you have loved our family well, then there's a disconnect. You're not understanding. That could have been my husband. It could have been my father. And so, I think that's one of the things that's been so hard for me, because we really, truly have been loved in this church. We truly have felt like a part of this community, but it's so hard to see people who have loved us well maybe not understanding how deeply this impacts us,
and translating that.
Right, and seeing the bigger picture here. And so I think that's been difficult, and I think just in general, African American Christians struggle with the lack of compassion from white Christians. They struggle with the lack of understanding. And I really do get maybe not understanding all of it fully, but it's a struggle when we feel like we're not being listened to, when we feel like, if we have a conversation and it's I don't know if I can get, you know what I mean? Is that really happening? Is there really racism?
Right.
That's when we start to feel so discouraged. Yes.
Invalidation of your experience.
Yes. And that's when it just starts to feel really discouraging. Like, well, we're friends. We've sat in church together. We've worshiped together. We've done potlucks together. Our kids have played in the nursery together. And now I'm telling you this thing that has impacted my family. And now you're like, and I'm like, So I think that's really where I start to struggle. It's difficult. But I'm willing to do the work, and just praying that people are willing to also do the work and listening. So,
Well, I feel like you maybe have shared us a little bit, but what are you hopeful for?
I actually have felt very hopeful. Again, as an educator, seeing this next generation of amazing students rising up, and these parents who have taken the time to sign their kids up for class, have the conversations, buy the books. I'm hopeful for that to continue, for parents, for conversations to change, and have it not just be households of people of color who are talking about race, because I've talked about race for my entire life. I cannot remember a moment in my life where I was not aware that I was African American, where I was not aware that the odds were stacked against me. It has been so much a part of me. I remember my dad used to drop me off for school and say, "Love you, have a great day, study hard." Like, it was like this, I knew that I was already behind. It was ingrained in me that I was gonna fight hard, I was gonna do well in school. And so all of these conversations about race have always been a part of me.
Always been, yeah.
What I would love to see, what I'm hopeful for, is that people who are not people of color have these conversations about race. I have a friend who blogs about a lot of racial issues. They're a transracial adoptive family. And one of the things she says is she's talking to her white friends and her kids' white friends. And she's saying, the more you educate your kids about the things my kids of color are going through, the better this is all going to be. So she gives an example of, you know, if her African-American son is walking down the street and a cop stops him, can you tell your white kids who are my son's friends what this might mean for him? Can you tell them to stick around with him? Can you tell them, you know, to stay with him during this time? Just things like that. As a mom, if all of my kids' friends who were white understood the things that my black kids might go through, I would feel so much more comforted knowing that they're going to say, okay, I'm going to stand with him or her in this situation, or this person is treating them wrongly because of the color of their skin, and I'm aware of this, and I'm going to be there with them, instead of them sort of being naive, because they don't have to know about those things. If you're not a kid of color, you don't have to know that a person of color might be followed in a store by security or accused of stealing, or probably couldn't wear a hooded sweatshirt out in public without somebody thinking they're up to no good. You don't have to know these things. But man, it would be great if you did.
Yeah.
It would be great if you knew those.
Right.
Because you can change the conversation
Right.
around that stuff. You can change some of that stuff from happening as you get older and see things more clear.
Right.
So yeah, I guess I'm hopeful that it won't just be my black kids who are having these conversations, that it won't just be kids of color who are being sat down by their parents and having these conversations, but that white people are really saying, they're not arguing that racism is a thing, because it is. And they're really trying hard not to pull in their political beliefs. They're just saying, hey, we're going to show up for our friends of color. We're going to show up for people of color. We know that this is happening, and it's not going to happen on our watch. That would be amazing.
Yeah. Well, Latrice, I'm excited that you are doing what you're doing. I hope you can continue to be able to do it. I know you're going to get busy, right? But I certainly hope that you can continue to do that and to see the fruition from that. And thank you for sharing a little bit of your life and your thoughts with us
Absolutely.
tonight.
Absolutely.